Hey everyone, I wanted to give my positive take on The Eternals, the new Marvel movie that just was released on Disney Plus. So, true to my name, I'm going to keep this as positive as I can, which isn't to mean that I'm not critical about some aspects or there weren't some aspects that I wouldn't have done differently. First of all, the cinematography from it was really beautiful. A lot of naturalistic imagery, a lot of browns and grays, and actual locations as opposed to most other Marvel movies. The cast was all pretty strong. However, I would say that I would have used the actual characters themselves a little bit differently. In particular, Salma Hayek and Angelina Jolie were all over the advertisements for this one, but they weren't actually in the movie all that much. Wouldn't say it's false advertisement. They were probably completely aware of what they were doing when they did that, and they made that decision. Of the rest of the cast, Gemma, Gemma Chan, who played the character Cersei, also did a really good job. I'm not really familiar with her from much, except for her voice acting in Raya and The Last Dragon. I thought she was really good in that as well. And she is a side character in Captain Marvel, but didn't really get a lot of chance to do acting in that movie, I would say. So I'd also like to talk about the action sequences in this really quickly, which is to say that a lot of them felt really rote. I think this one really fell into the trap of how Marvel always has like a second unit director of action that makes their action really consistent. In this case, thought a lot of the action was pretty flat and boring. Of the ones that I did like, the final battle was pretty solid. What ends up happening there, and the initial few bouts with the deviants, there was some interesting stuff in there. I think the overall concept of this movie was a really interesting one, which is just the idea that we have all these myths, these legends. It's kind of deconstructing what DC has done with the Justice League and all that. Obviously in the DC universe, we have all these characters that are kind of analogs for mythical characters, like how Superman is clearly supposed to resemble, Apollo or Jesus. These other, really important figures in spirituality. Batman can be tied to, the Lord of the Underworld, Hades, kind of like a dark, death-obsessed character. Wonder Woman has always been sort of a stand-in for, the goddess Diana or Athena or any of these, really important Greek gods or goddesses. And we have various others, the Flash is kind of like a Hermes type character who runs really fast and is there to give messages. So you can see how they're kind of, and you can even see the original creation of the Eternals with Jack Kirby, how he was trying to really, bring over his new gods to the Marvel Universe. So obviously you get some of this cross-contamination. I did also like the visuals, were very reminiscent of Jack Kirby art, particularly with the Celestials. This was it was a much vaster cosmos than most other Marvel movies, particularly, something like Black Widow, which is very on the ground. This is a very, epic sort of tale told across millennia, but it's all, sort of centered on Earth itself, which is interesting. One thing that I really liked, and I think this actually benefited from people's lack of knowledge of the Eternals themselves, is that you find out about halfway through the movie that actually all the characters are robots. They've never actually been real life. They're these synthetic beings that were created by the Celestials for this important task. I haven't read any of the comics, so I'm not familiar with these characters at all. So I don't know how true to their motivation any of this is. I do think it definitely has something to do with, some super powerful creations or some super powerful creator beings, made these creations to kind of try to do something, and then they eventually sort of rebel. Shades of Paradise Lost there as well. So in this movie, it's very much set up as a mystery. You're trying to figure out what happened to Salma Hayek. Somehow the deviants were set on her. And we don't really know why until you find out sort of near the end of the movie that Richard Madden had actually been faithful to the Celestial plan all along, and he had never intended to let them prevent the birth of this new Celestial that will presently destroy Earth. So he actually ends up sort of betraying all the rest of them as does the Sprite character. Um, and I should mention that I also really liked the actress who played Sprite, um, who is Leah McHugh. I thought she did a really good job and did some representation of, kind of otherism. I did also see this movie really reflective of, Marvel's desire to kind of make more groups aside from the Avengers. They had that success with Guardians of the Galaxy. Now they're trying to port it to more and more other films and properties. So it's kind of an interesting job they did here. I do also see them sort of playing with, eventually, obviously, they'll bring the X-Men into this universe. So they're trying to figure out how to balance super powerful characters in that way as well. Of the rest of the cast, I thought it was very confusing that they got two Game of Thrones actors, Kit Harrington and Richard Madden, who come from the same family in that in that property. So it was very confusing seeing them here, sort of playing very similar characters. I did kind of confuse them at several points, and they're both supposed to be love interests for Cersei, so it's additionally confusing at certain points of the movie. And another thing that really didn't work for me is any of the tags for this movie. I don't know if there are, Black Knight fans out there or fans of Pip or Star Fox. I really don't know those characters or care about them. And I think this is kind of a problem that MCU is having at this moment, which is, they did a really great job of bringing people into this comic book universe, but now they're starting to explore some of the, even weirder aspects. Obviously with Guardians, they had a very irreverent take, very much a comedy, or something like Thor Ragnarok, where they kind of spun the mythos on its head and made it sort of subversive. But in this case, they're very much, introducing kind of these rote characters, and it wasn't as successful in that aspect. And again, I don't know if viewers really follow some of this nerdier, geekier stuff as they want to. Obviously Harry Styles helped people's interest in that Star Fox reveal, but other than that, I don't think that was an interesting scene or should have been in the movie at all. I did worry when I was starting the movie that I thought it was maybe the same cinematographer as Arrival or Solo, who does beautiful compositions, especially in HDR. That's where that style really blossoms. But even though this movie was very dark and sort of visually reminiscent of some of these Zack Snyder movies, I did think that it was pretty easy to tell what was going on, even in some of the darker scenes. So that wasn't really a problem. And again, you have these beautiful vistas, really utilizing Earth to its uttermost potential. So this is kind of a time-hopping tale. You see some flashbacks, and then very much this present-day drama. You kind of see that around 1521 they accomplished their goal, which is getting rid of these deviants, and then they kind of, went their separate ways to kind of interact with humanity. Another aspect that I thought was really strong was everything having to do with Brian Tyree Henry, from Atlanta and last seen in Kong vs. Godzilla. I thought his character was really interesting, Phastos. You kind of have this idea of the guy who creates all the tech for the gods, Hephaestus, all these different mythological characters that sort of pertain to that. But in this case, it's somebody who actually had compassion for humanity and wanted to share some of these ideas. You see him early on, wants to share the steam engine way too soon. Instead of sharing the plow. And then eventually we have a pretty effective flash forward where he's now standing in the wreckage of Hiroshima, having, been blown up by an atomic bomb. And that's kind of like the end point of technology as far as he is concerned, where he, again, turns on humanity. You also have characters like Barry Keoghan, I'm not sure exactly how to say it, the guy from The Killing of a Sacred Deer in Dunkirk. I thought that character was also pretty badly done, not that interesting, pretty flat. But he had an interesting idea, which is that, again, he wanted to sort of control humanity so that he could lead them with their best interests. And you see him use this power at several points throughout the film, and you kind of think he's going to be the one to solve their big dilemma with the Celestial, just pacify or put it back to sleep, but that doesn't end up happening. You also have Harish Patel, who plays a hilarious, sort of foil to Kumail Nanji's character. you learn that Kumail has sort of set himself up as this Indian, eventually Bollywood filmmaker. He's kind of got like a film dynasty, and he's been playing all these like heroic, epic god characters. And then he has this sort of human attendant guy who is creating a documentary throughout the film. So there's lots of little funny moments for that. Of the humor, I should say that there are some moments that work, but a lot of them really also fall flat. There's this kind of running gag where they keep comparing Icarus, who has flight and laser eye abilities, to Superman, and maybe this is just getting ahead of any potential lawsuits. DC famously fought with the Shazam creator for a really long time for the exact same reason. So maybe they're just getting ahead of that and saying, we know this is a complete ripoff of Superman, but you've seen it in The Boys and a bunch of other deconstructive things, so we're doing it here as well. But those jokes for me really fell flat. I didn't see this in a theater or anything, so I don't know how well it played with a big audience, but it just felt very strange to be referencing DC characters all of a sudden, which I think they'd only done previously in like Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi one. Let's see. A lot of the sort of god characters are pretty flat. Lauren Rindloff also did a really good job. Although I was a little confused, like, was she signing with American Sign Language even though it wouldn't be invented? Like, is the idea that she created it? But in any case, she did a really good job. Again, her character was very, like, sidelined. She had apparently just been hanging out in the spaceship and probably going in and out for millennia, for several thousand years. So I thought that was kind of a waste as well. Gemma Chan, again, is kind of interesting. She's a really good actress. She works well off of Madden. Though, again, they were just very sort of serious, dour characters, so there's not really a lot to get into. But she's obviously a very empathetic person and does some really great acting, with her face and delivering her lines. Again, I hadn't had really high expectations when I was setting out to watch this. In my mind, it was kind of equivalent to like the Inhumans or something like that. And it's pretty clear that obviously this will eventually tie into things like Miss Marvel. Her powers are kind of related to all this stuff. So I will say it wasn't an Inhuman style flop, and it made at least double its budget. I don't know what it translates to after marketing and all that and pandemic stuff, but obviously they made a lot of money. The villains were pretty mediocre. You fall into that same trap of like the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, or Cloverfield, or any of these movies where they like over rely on these like CGI beasts. It just doesn't come off as realistic or as compelling, at least in my opinion. So I thought that was definitely a fail as well, or maybe like the later Transformers movies. You see that these creatures are evolving, and I really thought this would be their tie into the X-Men. One particular deviant keeps stealing powers from the Eternals, and eventually ends up like a humanoid, kind of reminiscent of like a Dragon Ball Z character or something, Cell. So he ends up, hyper evolved, and he's actually talking and like relating to things that happened. And you kind of see, obviously Celestials weren't in the right either, because they were willing to let humanity all die, and that was kind of the role that the Eternals had been set out for, unknowingly all along. Aside from Selma Hayek, who maybe should have said something earlier to anybody. But yeah, you see that they have this conflict about wanting to preserve humanity, but then also not wanting to doom a bunch of other universes. I also did think this is a fun way to get basically Galactus-type characters into the movies without having to actually reference Galactus. And it's funny, people have been kind of comparing this to Zack Snyder films, but the one I would actually compare it to instead of the Justice League movies is, Watchmen, Alan Moore's original book, obviously. Since this was based on a murder mystery sort of. One of them secretly has betrayed the others. They have this big plan that nobody else knows about that's going to preserve some sort of peace in the universe at the expense of billions of human lives. So yeah, it's kind of Marvel definitely deconstructing, or I should say close out, probably deconstructing a lot of these mythological things. And that's all really interesting. There's a reason we tell these stories. There's a reason some of the earliest stories, like Gilgamesh, like Zoroaster, are about these, beings with a lot of different powers. Siddhartha, beings who go on these epic adventures, they sort of reflect humanity. It's kind of like the Celestial itself that they describe. It's being born in this egg, and it's taking on all the, thought energy, I guess, of different humans around the world. So it's almost like the culmination of all of humanity into this entity. And you even have the implication later in the movie that somehow the Celestial himself has decided to help try to prevent its birth. I was a little confused by this. They say at the end of the movie that they actually kill the Celestial, but I had definitely gotten the impression up to that point that they said that they had just, put it back to sleep or something like that. So I was a little confused when they actually said that. I did like really that Angelina Jolie apparently seemed to have done her own stunts. I mean, I don't know what CGI trickery they did with stunt doubles or whatever, but it seemed like she was still in fighting form and made it really impressive, Goddess Athena type. Again, Salma Hayek is totally wasted, even though she does use some of her more naturalistic acting. Anyone who's seen Beatrice at dinner or things like this can see she's definitely doing her more realistic version of her whole thing, which is great to see. But I just wish she'd been in it more or had more interesting things to do. Oh, and I should mention there is actually Gilgamesh in this movie, and that's one of the really good characters as well. However, played by Don Lee. However, they kill him off way too early in the movie, so again, doesn't really get a lot to do. Again, you get the sense that there's a lot of, turmoil probably behind the scenes, plot lines that were kind of cut off and just ideas, vestigial ideas that were kind of left over, things that don't always make sense. Again, I did really like Leah McHugh. I thought she was kind of the heart of the movie. Although they did a very stupid, like, Chekhov's gun type thing where early in the movie she's just playing with a little samurai sword for no apparent reason. And then, of course, later in the movie she tries to kill Cersei with it, who then just turns it into bubbles and is fine, I guess. Yeah, so she had an interesting plot line, Sprite, which is just... and again, I thought this was almost like New Mutants done well. So they're obviously trying to do this Mutants stuff or Young Avengers stuff. Where she does have this dilemma that she's just eternally been a child and just wants to grow and experience love and all these things, and actually is in love with Icarus and jealous of Cersei. So I thought her turn at the end wasn't very convincing, but again, I did actually really like the action that we got at the end, which was just it was that Justice League thing again. What are you gonna do if Superman goes bad? How can the rest of the other heroes stop him or try to prevent him from messing up their plan? So you got some really interesting stuff there from Fastos. You got some really interesting stuff with sorry, I want to call the fast one Fastos. I guess just because that's what it sounds like. But obviously that's Makari. So I thought this was the best speedster action we got since the original Quicksilver scenes in the X-Men movies. I thought they did a really good job of balancing her power set and not really over relying on slow motion, just kind of having her zip around as one might if they were super fast. But yeah, then you get a very rote ending. They managed to prevent the birth of this god. Again, really great visuals with the finger sticking out, very naturalistic cinematography. And then you think everything's going to be fine, but one of the Celestials, the Celestial who you've been seeing all along, this cool effect where it fades in on his face, he actually appears right next to Earth. Again, Galactus imagery, of course. And he says, I need to take these three who remained on Earth at this point. And then kind of the side characters who didn't really do that much in the movie kind of go off to explore in space, I guess. Yeah, so we'll see how this all ends up. Obviously, the Dane character, Kit Harrington, believes he's somehow going to help with this problem. I don't really see how. So you see a lot more seeds for different Marvel properties and Eternals too, although I kind of doubt that's going to happen given the reception. Yeah, so again, I think it's a really interesting movie. I thought it's a lot more thought-provoking and, again, a big, epic palette that they're painting on than some of these other more recent movies. And it obviously had some really interesting ideas at the heart of it. I don't think it quite all came together, and I think they kind of wasted several characters. Maybe should have had fewer characters, or maybe could have just reworked the plotline slightly. I don't really know. Again, I haven't read any of the comics, and I don't really know these characters at all, aside from seeing the movie. But yeah, I think a lot of it was really strong. They could probably make a sequel that would be better, but I don't really know how you do that when you already have blasted through several thousand years of potential storyline. Since they kind of flattened out of past. I also kind of thought this was similar to what the Assassin's Creed movie should have been, which is kind of funny since they're obviously not related at all. But yeah, you have again the ideas of control versus organized chaos and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't think this is the worst movie that Marvel has made. Certainly, when you look at like Iron Man 2 and several of the movies that people, Thor 2, people could point to. Nor is it near their best. Still a solid effort. Chloe Zhao seems like a really cool person. The whole cast really seemed like they were giving it their all of what they had to work with, which again, for certain characters, wasn't all that much. And it was maybe too focused on a few things that I would have changed around. But I think it's overall worth watching, particularly now that it's on Disney Plus. And we're thinking about just the idea of myth and how we build up these superhumans and what they mean for humans and for themselves as fictional beings.